Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and changemakers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our documentary series, From Bankruptcy to Reinvention, the City of Stockton, California. The documentary series attempts to provide listeners with the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the various voices of changemakers working to reinvent the city of Stockton. The interviews were conducted from August to September 2016, leading up to the election of Mayor Michael Tubbs, who is our central character in the series. The interviews in the documentary series have been edited to fit into our show format. The unedited full interviews will be posted on my website, georgekoster.com, along with each episode of the series.
Because most people, we see it in everything today, it's them. It's so easy to be judgmental and put the them label on it versus us. And that gives you a simple solution. It allows you the out to not have to understand the situation, to not have to get involved, and be able to pretend that you're getting involved and you know the answer. When in reality, you don't know jack diddle squat. And you don't really care to know jack diddle squat, which is really annoying.
In this episode, we feature the voice of Fred Schell, the administrator of STAN, Stocktonians Taking Action to Neutralize Drugs. Fred shares his passion, insights, and organization's work over the past 2+ decades in South Stockton to address policing, neighborhood revitalization, slumlord abatement, housing, and commercial development. STAN is part of the ecosystem of wraparound services that Michael Tubbs works closely with in the reinvention of Stockton. Fred and STAN's team works closely with the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition teams featured in Episode 7 with Jasmine Delafosse and Episode 11 with Hector Laura.
My name is Fred Schell. I'm with STAN, which is an acronym for Stocktonians Taking Action to Neutralize Drugs, and I'm the administrator.
I was hoping you could provide our audience a little bit of background on why STAN was created. What is its mission?
STAN is a neighborhood group that started in the late 80s in southeast Stockton, our neighborhood here out at our primary intersection of Airport Way and East 8th Street. The late 80s was the crack cocaine epidemic, and this was a predominantly African-American minority low-income neighborhood. And the crack epidemic just went crazy here. This was the place to come and buy crack for Sacramento, for Modesto, for East Bay. This intersection out here was where it was allowed. And as long as it was done there, nobody cared. And the neighbors and the gangs went crazy, the murders went crazy, the continuous shooting, the epidemic needles in the school sandbox and playground, and finally the neighbors, about 20 people got together and they just said, we can't take this anymore. And said, we're tax-paying citizens, we're all law-abiding people, all these folks out there selling, they don't live in this neighborhood. Why are you allowing this to happen here? In the city, you are allowing it to happen here. The only time the cops would show up was in 3 cars at a time to pick up a dead body. They wouldn't come just 1 car, always 3 to protect themselves. But they wouldn't come out for, if you called, they wouldn't show up because that was not about protecting the neighborhood, it was about protecting themselves. So then they went to city council meetings, they went to school board meetings, they interviewed with newspaper, and they basically humiliated the city and the county and the school district until there was cooperation. The chief of police at the time recognized the problem very well, and it was hitting his police department very hard since they were the ones having to respond to all these calls, and it was stressing all his line officers out, and everybody was going out on health leave, workers' comp leave, mental health leave, and there was nobody to replace him. So he came in, and that was about the time community policing was starting to come up across the country. We were one of the first places to wholeheartedly embrace it, and over the course of 3 years working with the police department and my board, they reduced crime 80% in this neighborhood. It was very successful. It's amazing what can be done when you get a cross-section of people and city officials that really want to do reform.
What would you say were some of the main elements of that approach that were the most effective? So if someone was listening to this and they thought, wow, I wanted to do that in my neighborhood.
Two most important things are, from on the community side, are people do get involved. And it's not just getting involved, it's the honesty, particularly when you're dealing with problems. You have to be honest about, my partner says it well. It says, if you're not ready to turn in your own family members, then you're not ready for this. Now, that's putting it a little bluntly, but, in terms of how bad the crime was, you have to be honest about the problem, and you have to be honest about your own involvement in it. And not just go, oh, it's somebody else's fault, it's somebody else's fault, they've got to fix it, they've got to do it. There's got to be level honesty on both sides. And on the city and the policing side, it was the same thing for them. They had to admit that a big part of it was, as we're witnessing today, is their own, what we're calling it, implicit bias or unconscious bias about poor people, people of color, that you're all the enemy, and we're here to take you down when they come into the neighborhood. And what changed community policing is the chief and the upper officers started to change that attitude. The officers were assigned down here for a full year. We had the same officers. This is the only place they work, so they got to know everybody. And once you stay in a place and you start talking to people and you start meeting their family and you start dealing with their problems, not just coming in, two people are fighting and arguing and you got 20 people standing around, you throw everybody on the ground and handcuff them all and haul them all in, which was the old practice. Now you're actually coming, you're sitting down, you're talking with the people, you know the people beforehand, before the incident blows up, and now you recognize that the person you're arguing with was mentally ill and he's on medication from the mental health department, but maybe he isn't or he isn't on his medication that day. You recognize that, yes, he's all acting out and all looking all violent, but he's not a danger because you know he's a mental health patient. All that changes once you understand the situation.
How would City Council member Tubbs work here, but also in bringing and rallying the council and the city? Because that it seems to be also a major component to it.
It's understanding the problem, both from an intellectual and from a personal, and which is almost always overlooked, a cultural point of view. Anytime you're talking about fixing a problem, reforming a problem, reform is multifaceted. Within any organization, when you're trying to deal with reforming, that organization has a culture. That culture is conflicting with another culture, which is conflicting with another culture. And we almost always ignore the cultural aspects involved.
Councilperson Tubbs basically came to observe, understands it, and then brought that message back. Is that how that worked, and then worked hand in hand with Stand?
Michael is what I kind of call an international townie. There is no label for it. When I worked internationally, the people, and it didn't make any difference if, they were Filipino or Mexican or Dutch or English or Australian or American. Once you've gone through that process, you see it differently. And you become basically an international citizen. Well, Michael has been through that process. And he has brought that, I don't know where he picked it up. He did live in South Africa for a while and going to school in Stanford, which is very much an international community. But from my point of view, he brought that internationalism, that understanding, that ability to see through all the bull, all the walls and defenses that people put up because they really don't want to understand. And be able to kind of cut through that and act as the catalyst to go, okay, you come over here, let's work together, bringing different people in. And it's like your catalytic converter. All the valuable stuff that's inside your catalytic converter, all those precious metals that people want to steal, right? They don't do anything. Those precious metals just sit there. When the gases pass over them, it converts those gases into something else. Now, Michael's a lot more active than that, but just that process of having somebody in the center, being able to bring the different actors together, having enough respect and status to be able to bring the various actors together, and get them to cooperate and to see what's going on and understand. It just tears down. Our society is constructed of institutional silos. And none of these silos talk to each other. And they all pretend they do. And they're all one's better than the other. The school district doesn't talk to the county school district. The county mental health department doesn't talk to the city. Nobody talks to anybody, but they pretend they do, so that they don't have to deal with their real issues and communicate across outside of their own boundaries that they've created. There's a good reason for it, but these times are tough. Finances are limited.
So do you feel like Stan and the work that you're doing here is part of that catalytic converter, that you're trying to bring together all of these disparate resources to this community?
We're not as good at it as Michael is, because you need somebody at Michael's level to bring the actors together. When we're in the community doing the work, you get involved in whether it's the crime issues or the housing issues and dealing with slumlords. You kind of get pulled down to the everyday job of getting it done. And that's different. That's a whole different role than being the catalyst to bring all the different actors together. You need to create real reform, real change. You need to have both.
You need to have someone at a policy level that can bring those players together, but you also need organizations such as STAN to actually execute that work.
Yes.
What are some of the most impactful programs, projects that you've been working here in STAN's existence?
I'll give you a brilliant example. We just are finishing up right now. Julian and Phelps Street, which is a block off of Airport Way. We have had a probably 20-year-old nightly open-air illegal drug market going on there. Small little residential intersection, residential homes all around it. Small, 1,000 square foot home, 900 to 1,000 square foot homes, all built during World War II, so they're very modest. But there at the intersection, you will have from 9 o'clock at night until 3 o'clock in the morning, anywhere from 30 to 100 people hanging out in the street, on the sidewalks, drinking, pop up their trunk and lay out a full bar, boom boxes going, doing drugs and trading drugs and selling drugs. How can that be allowed to happen on public property? And we have been arguing for 20 years that the cost to the city and to the police department to deal with that, wouldn't it be cheaper to just give us the money to buy those 5 homes right around this intersection, rehab those homes, sell them to low-income families because it's a low-income neighborhood, to stabilize the intersection? And with Michael, we were fine. And because we got the silo, even the police department was going to the city housing department, and they couldn't convince the city housing department that it was a good idea. I've had a succession of police chiefs totally sold on it, and they go, we know, but we can't. Don't even ask me again, Fred, because it just creates too much problem. Oh, trying to save the money at the city, a lot of money, because we're probably spending $100,000 a month in policing on that intersection, whereas we were asking for $100,000. It ended up being $75,000 to fix it completely, and we've done it over the last year. We bought those 5 houses, we read them, we sold them, we're closing on the last one today, 1510 Julian, and now the drug market is gone. And the neighbors are all going, why didn't you do this before? And that's just Michael doing that, making the connection, not beating anybody up over it, but just making the obvious, getting these 2 silos to work together.
So then part of that was doing the public outreach to create the awareness and the public support.
Correct. And Michael doesn't even take credit for that. I keep going, Michael, in all your campaigning for the mayorship right now, mayorhood, mayoral office, what do you want to call it? You don't take credit for that. He goes, no, I can't. You guys did the work. But Michael, it never would have happened without you. Because we've been trying for 20 years. And boom, you come in and you make people see the light, and it's done. Until then, we were just the other. We were allowed to be labeled as the other, oh, it's their problem. If we spend money on it, they'll just screw it up again anyways, and we'll have to come back and fix it again. So why even bother? It's because the neighborhood can't get their act together. That's why this exists. It's the same labels that are used over and over and over again. Right. And then they wonder why the neighborhoods get angry at us.
You're listening to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. This is George Coster, your host, and if you're just joining us, in this episode we are discussing the reinvention of the city of Stockton, California. We're speaking to Fred Schell, the administrator of STAN, Stocktonians Taking Action to Neutralize Drugs, who's discussing his experience in working with the police, City of Stockton, Michael Tubbs, and the community to develop affordable housing at one of the worst intersections in South Stockton. Sounds like STAN is a non-profit affordable housing development corporation, like a Shodo?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So, and in my conversation with Michael yesterday, he had mentioned the liquor store that you guys were able to just close down. Perhaps you can share a little bit about the liquor store, and then I understand you have the first right to do something with the liquor store site?
There's the liquor store, and then there's a large vacant lot just north of it. So there's two separate issues here. The large vacant lot is owned by the city. It was a redevelopment project that the city now has to dispose of that vacant lot. And we have been given, because of our success with the housing in the neighborhood, the city is going to allow us to have exclusive negotiating rights for that parcel over the next 6 months to put commercial retail, maybe housing on. The liquor store just south of it has been a 15-year disaster. Just to show how blinded a community can be about something that's embarrassing. Here you got a liquor store that's been operating for 15 years. When you go in there, I won't even bother to describe it. What I'll tell you is when people go through the line and they ring up your purchases, it's ding and the cash register opens, but nothing gets recorded on a tape. There's no sales tax charged. If you're buying returnable bottles, there's no CRV charged. If you're using your food stamp card, your EBT card, nothing gets recorded on that. How can a business operate without paying or recording or having the documentation for all these different taxing entities? From the franchise tax board to the county to the city. There's so many regulatory bodies there. The only way that kind of operation can go on is because those authorities that are responsible do not give a holy hoot. And the drug trafficking that went on and the drug dealers inside the store. Police were trying, but nobody wanted to enforce it. It wasn't that big. Oh, as long as it was there, it was okay. That's the message that the neighborhood gets. And when the neighborhood complains, all the city fathers and mothers go, well, why don't you just get your act together? We've been literally told that at city council meetings. Like they're not responsible. Well, I've said it repeatedly that one of the best things that happened to this city was bankruptcy. Because with bankruptcy, we got a new city manager. And he brought in new city department heads. And with that, a new culture. And the old actors, the old business interests, and I include unions as part of a business interest, they've had to step back because they're the ones that got us into the mess between the housing developers and the unions that they brought along with them and bought them out and co-opted them. They've had to go, okay, well, it wasn't us, so they've had to quit playing politics. And so in the process, now you're getting decisions made at a city level that are for the whole city. They're looking at everything involved, not just pockets where individuals want the city to basically cover and pay for them. Right at that same time, Michael decides to run for office and becomes a city councilman. So now he's suddenly got a whole new group of high-level staff to work with that really understand. We got some good people. Our city manager now is really good. And this is coming from some. I'm going to say this publicly, and it's going to because I've told all the city staff. I have been a huge critic of the city for the last 20 years. Tremendous critic. Staff have been controlled and manipulated and have done nothing for these poor and older neighborhoods. Now that's changed. I'm a huge supporter of the city now. They're doing great stuff. I sure hope it continues. And I give them all the support and all the credit in the world because they are addressing the issues, they're looking at the issues, they're being honest about the continued poverty down here, the continued lack of commercial development, and they're working with us. Are they giving us everything they want? No, because they still got to deal with the whole city. But they're being fair, and they're giving us a chance, and because of that, things are getting done, and the attitudes are changing in the neighborhood. Has it changed everybody? No, because there's a lot of resentment. I mean, you can't just... There was a grand jury report that came out last year. I don't know if you saw it with... There was two of them. One was about the complete lack of code enforcement in the poor neighborhoods for the last 50 years. Just allowed the slumlords to have willy-nilly, and then blame it on the neighborhoods for being so run down. And the other one was just the absolute lack of investment and lack of attention to South and East Stockton. And the grand jury just slammed them. And city council and city staff basically said, yeah, it's true. You're right. Where in the past, city councils before the bankruptcy would have been, no, look at the long list of things we've done. And then you could lay out a whole bunch of thousands of teeny little details and make it sound like you've really done great things, when in reality, it was just all pretend.
To go back to the liquor store, how would Stan take an opportunity like that, and what would you do with it?
Within this period, the same period I was talking about, of the bankruptcy and new staff coming in, we got a deputy city attorney, Susanna Wood, who made it her mission to deal with code enforcement and to deal with that liquor store. And so she, working with the police department and code enforcement, started building the case to take that liquor store to court to have a judge appoint a receiver. It's one of the strongest tools they have now when you've got an owner that just continues to ignore all responsibilities. And when ABC, Alcohol, Beverage, and Control, should have jumped in here years ago. Couldn't get them to move either. I hope they're listening. They wouldn't, so the city did. We expect a huge fight. Didn't get it. Both the owner of the liquor store and the operator of the store were there, but they just they didn't put up a fight at all. Don't understand why, but it's now in the hands of a receiver. We have been holding many neighborhood meetings with various stakeholders in the neighborhood, churches, other neighborhood groups, neighborhood watches, other people that have been involved in the neighborhood, leadership folk, asking them what do they want to see there. And one of the things that popped up right away was, the moms just went, urgent care. Us guys kind of went, duh. Because nurse urgent care is miles and miles. You got to go to far northwest Stockton or far southwest Stockton to find an urgent care. We have a chance now to impact this, talk to the receiver and the court to get something in where that liquor store is that's going to really serve the needs of the neighborhood.
What would be a best case scenario? What would you like to see? What are the resources that you need? And how would you like the community to rally around your mission to help you accomplish more?
So we learned that housing was a huge part of it, and the slumlords were a huge part of it, and that store that was serving that was also part of it. So now we've gone from community policing to housing, and now we're moving into commercial development, because we have a huge lack of commercial development on Airport Way here, and we see the need. How are we going to do it? I don't know. But as you get to know people, we didn't know what we were going to do when we started doing housing. Well, we do apartment buildings too. We didn't know what we were doing when we started then. But you just learn to be tenacious. You learn to be stubborn. You learn to look for other people and work in good, solid relationships and people who are committed to this. The business community that believe in this. There's a lot who don't. And they're not going to try and work with us. There's a lot of folks in the Bay Area who are interested in helping us develop this almost now 3 acres of commercial. We're looking at some public space. Think of it like the old Mercado. You got all this retail, and the center of it is you got this open public space where all the community activities go on. What are we thinking of a small version of that? Inside you got the public space area where people can have their quinceañeras, they can have birthday parties, and you got ringed around it as restaurants and shops, and upstairs from that is housing for an urgent care facility, nonprofit organizations, the housing authority is talking about moving its office right there. Maybe it's housing for special needs families, disabled families, mental health. We have a lot of mental health people in this neighborhood that are getting no services. How are we going to put all this together? I haven't a clue. But we have attracted a lot of really good talent. And what Michael has done is just brought in tremendous talent. He's brought back all these international folks that have worked internationally and gone to Harvard and gone to Stanford and gone to Sac State and then went to LA and worked in the poor areas of LA and come back. Brilliant people. And they've energized all of us. They've energized me. Instead of being the old cynical guy, I can now talk like this. It's really fun. It's fun. I'm a 65-year-old guy, and I've been doing this kind of work since I was 26. And this is the most excited I've ever been. It's fun pulling other people in and helping them understand. Because there's a lot of frustrated folks just like us out there that are very talented, are willing to work hard. They just need to do something they feel that's going to be effective.
So final question.
Mm-hmm.
Fred, what is something about yourself that people don't know?
I'm a Aikidoist. I have been for almost 30 years now. And that really helps with doing this kind of work. Because for those that aren't familiar with Aikido, it's a Japanese martial art that started in the 40s and the 50s. But it's all about working with your opponent, working with conflict, not being afraid of conflict, and accepting it, moving with it, and dealing with it in a peaceful way. When I say peaceful, I don't mean it's passive at all. It's not aggressive, but it is assertive. And to do this work, you have to be assertive. To work in the community and to put yourself out there in the things that you're going, after you're done, you're going, why the hell did I do that? You just got to throw yourself into it. And with it comes confidence and the willingness to do more and more. One thing Aikido and this work has really taught me is working with somebody, all your preconceived notions of looking at them are wrong. They're just wrong. First impressions mean absolutely nothing. Our brain lies to us. Our eyes lie to us. Until you dig deeper and work really hard with somebody and confront that stuff, do you really find out what people are like.
Thank you, Fred. That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to Fred Schell, the administrator of STAN, who shared his organization's work to develop both a liquor store, which was an open drug market, and a 3-acre vacant parcel into a mixed-use project to become a community anchor to the South Stockton neighborhood. Voices of the Community is a labor of love. This documentary series on the city of Stockton's reinvention is a tribute to my mother, Josephine Coster-Wiley, who grew up in South Stockton and passed away during the production of the documentary series. My mom was a first-generation Italian immigrant whose family migrated to Stockton and owned a motel on the Old Charter Way, now renamed Martin Luther King Boulevard, in the heart of South Stockton. Mayor Michael Tubbs also grew up in South Stockton with his single mother, Ricole Dixon. Throughout the series, you'll hear voices of community members who are working with Michael Tubbs in both creating new organizations as well as working with fellow community members to reinvent both South Stockton and the greater Stockton community. I want to thank my associate producers, Eric Estrada and Nick McClinton, as well as advising producer, Malcolm Cecil. Please go to georgecoster.com to check out our next episode of From Bankruptcy to Reinvention, the City of Stockton, California documentary series, as well as our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. Please rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and share the story with your friends. Follow us on Twitter @GeorgeCoster and email us at george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.